Hello, all. Welcome to this world now. This is my living room world. Little 360 display of my life here. I put a wood stove in last winter. There you go. Check that out. Keeps us warm, even if the power goes out. Little feature. It's a lot of work though. I've been splitting wood, stacking it, trying to dry it out. Um, that's been my days off mostly. I hope you guys are all well. Let's let's go through this thing here. We finally get this chance to sit down and talk about more technical things or more big picture things that we haven't really been able to go over because we don't have a classroom really. So I'm hoping to present a good slate of words and ideas for understanding some of the things we've been doing. Let me first start with some inspiration. Ernest Hemingway is kind of a man's man. He was in the war and he was kind of a hunter, and he wrote these really brief, intense sentences that, for me, sometimes inspires me. So here's a few Hemingway lines. Check this one out. The best way to find out if you can trust somebody is to trust them. Sounds simple enough, but often it's the only way. If we don't extend one another trust, we never really know, right? Because if you act like you don't trust people, or if you don't trust people, they're probably not going to trust you either, and they're not going to act normally. So one of the things in life we should kind of work towards achieving is to become strong enough that we can trust people, and be so strong that we could handle it if it turns out they're lying to us. We could suffer that defeat and still move on. This next one's a little bit cynical, but I imagine you guys might see the truth in it too. Happiness in intelligent people is the rarest thing I know. So here he's equating, intellect with a certain amount of heavy-heartedness, right? The more you understand about the world, sometimes the more difficult it is to be easy or lighthearted or happy in this sense here. What do you think about that? You could chime in. It's sort of a formulation of ignorance is bliss, right? Like if you could somehow be unintelligent, you could be very happy. Like my dog, she's clearly not that smart, but she's happy all the time. And the final one here, courage is grace under pressure. Courage is grace under pressure. So yeah, it's pretty easy to be graceful when there's nothing on the line, but if you can keep that grace up, it'll appear like courage when there is more at stake. Okay, well, that was something that I used to have a really good time doing when I had sit-down classes. We'd pull some quotes out from artists or writers or philosophers and kind of mull them over. And I wish we could go back and forth on this, but after Thanksgiving, so next week, we'll have some Zoom classes where we actually could have a dialogue, and I hope you'll attend those. By the way, this is going to be kind of two classes in one. So there's a small quiz due today, and then at the end there's another quiz that's due Wednesday before you go to Thanksgiving, or before you stay home for Thanksgiving, or whatever it is you're going to do. So here, one last go at the big picture. How soil health creates crop quality and reduces pest problems. So that sentence holds a lot of weight. How soil health creates crop quality and reduces pest problems. So when we have healthy plants, the idea goes we'll have fewer pest problems. And this might make more sense in a little bit, but it relates to human health in a way too, right? When you know that you don't have much stress in your life and you're eating well and you're exercising, illness seems to stay away from you. It doesn't protect you from everything, but we do know that, the times I've gotten a sore throat and a cold, I could pretty much relate it to drinking too much for 3 days in a row and not eating well or something. It's very rare that I'm on top of my game, having vegetables for every meal, in a happy, healthy situation that would get sick in any way. And plants are like that too. Healthy plants have natural resistance to pests, and we're going to learn more about how to talk about that and make that happen. Oh gosh, unicorns, yeah. Well, so this is obviously a made-up picture, but for me it represents a diverse landscape. Of course, there's only yellow and red flowers there, but if you looked closer, I'm sure you'd find many, many species of plants in this unicorn meadow. Of course, in the background, we see different species of trees. So when nature is left to its own devices, it tends to move towards high diversity. Diversity of species, diversity of structure, diversity of color. This is one of the baseline features of natural environments. And we don't exactly know why this is, if there's some kind of innate push in nature to move towards diversification, or if that's part of the sort of competition for resources that species have. But we do know that it does diversity in nature does reduce the impacts of catastrophe, right? So if you have a bunch of different types of plants that grow in one area, if one gets wiped out by pests or whatever, there's still more to be there to take over, recover the soil. So in nature, we see this high diversity of species. We also see that soil is never exposed. Like when we till our fields in spring, that's really unusual looking. You never see anything like that in nature, where there'll be moments where all the soil is exposed at once. Of course, in a little bit, we'll show you there are some moments in natural systems where soil is exposed. Also in nature, we see there's a balance of decomposition and regrowth. So in a forest, there's always little saplings coming up, and also huge trees that have fallen and are rotting on the forest floor. This natural balance creates a lot of the soil that the trees will be growing in. There's also backup plans, we call them, or redundancy, when there's extra elements in place that are doing certain functions. So there's this redundancy in nature. Also, when we do see a disturbance like a fire or a flood, nature seems to have a backup plan to recolonize that quickly, and it's usually in the form of seeds, right? So what are our gardens and farms look like? So if we take nature as our baseline, we look at gardens and farms as kind of a weird version of some extreme thing that happens in nature from time to time. Our gardens and farms are highly disturbed, which means once or several times a year we can go through with machines or tools like shovels and rakes and break up the ground, dig it up, flip it over, turn it, scratch it up. All the things that we do when we cultivate are a disturbance. We also see in our gardens, we try to simplify the situation so that we can grow the crops more easily. So this means in the tomato patch, we only have tomatoes, or maybe one other thing. We rarely try to mix all of our vegetable varieties and species into one big chaotic jumble. We usually try to sort them out so that it's easier to trellis the ones that need trellised, or let the ones that need a vine out go that way, or for harvesting, for example. There's also, our gardens usually have high nutrient levels because we can bring fertility elements to there. We could add leaves or compost or manure. We could use soluble chemical fertilizers too. So our farms and gardens usually have abundant nutrients, or higher than usual amounts of nutrients. This is a picture of an actual landslide in China, which is a result of different factors, but typically deforestation of mountains followed by heavy rain events could push saturated soils down hills, and in this case it's covered up like whole buildings and stuff. This must have been a nightmare, and these tiny little things here are huge excavators just trying to dig out some of this property. This must have been so dangerous and damaging. Here's cars all pushed to the edge of it with the mud. So if you have the picture that I have here, you can see little bits of green coming in this landslide. So this landslide might be weeks old, and already there's seeds germinating in this loosened soil that are taking advantage of this new access to light and this new abundance here. So what I'm trying to show here is that we can take these natural disturbances like landslides or fires in this case, and we could take those as our model for our gardens and farms, right? So once a forest burns or a flood happens on a river, there's usually high nutrient availability from the water or the ash or everything that's got splashed up. And this is quite a bit like what we do in our gardens. There's lots of new sunlight following fire, flood, or landslides because all the competing trees have been destroyed or covered up. The soil also gets infused with air. So like when we till or rake new soil, we're fluffing it up and making it more penetrable to air in the environment. So does this sound like gardening to us now? When we actually speak out what fire, floods, or landslides do, it has a lot of the same elements as gardening. And if we take this model from nature, destroy and repair, we see that our gardens really can behave a lot like these processes, and we could use what we understand and can learn from these processes to build better and more resilient gardens. As gardeners, we could actually jump in on this process of succession. We could say, okay, we'll start this garden over here by doing salad mix and arugula and radishes and all these annual plants, and eventually plant that whole garden to like berries or then finally fruit trees and move on to another garden. So instead of using our gardens, one idea is instead of using our gardens to only grow annuals, we could start a garden here, grow annuals for a couple of years, and then let the succession towards more perennial crops happen, like plant asparagus, for example, or raspberries and strawberries, or peaches and apple trees. And that would be mimicking nature in a way, and would allow us to have multiple stories of production, multiple levels of food production in a single site. Let's pause for a second. So from this, I took a little break. So if I sound different, I'm more refreshed. And also, I looked at the recording. And I noticed that I was making a lot of like sounds with stuff and touching my face a lot, which is very aggravating for me to see. So I'm going to try to clean up my act a little bit. Getting back into this though, we see using this nature as a model perspective, we see the role of pests quite differently. Of course, pests in our gardens are just creatures that we haven't found a use for yet, or creatures that compete with us for what we're trying to eat. Of course, pests can be many things. They could be fungi, like molds that get in our crops. They could be insects that chew on our crops. They could also be other plants, which we would call weeds. So pests is the word we use for all the other organisms that we don't intend to get out of the garden, that kind of get in our way or frustrate us in our process. So what we know about pests? Well, pests are just looking for a meal, so they're just trying to live, and that they've found our gardens as a place where they could maybe carry out their life goals, right? The funny thing about pests is they usually live right in their food. So when we have, say, a cabbage worm They both eat the cabbage and find shelter in the cabbage.